at 9.
All right. So just as a reminder, please keep your microphones on mute. We do have a good sized group today. Also, you probably just heard that notice. We will be recording the presentation. Just a note about that. All right, I will pass it off. Next slide for Washington State Student Achievement Council.
Hi, good morning. So the Washington State Achievement Council, we're a small agency, smaller, not the smallest, but one of the smaller agencies located typically in Olympia, but we actually have staff all across Washington right now, including staff for 12th year campaign. We advance educational opportunities and attainment in Washington through policies and programs. And so we're really supporting you today with financial aid information to help you work with your students as they take the next steps after the application to funding their education for life after high school. So we're really excited to be here today and to work with y'all.
All right, so just a brief overview of our agenda for the day. Some of the three big pieces that we're going to be going over, we're going to be talking about the verification process, the award process, and the appeal process. So these are all like the three crucial parts of what students have to navigate after they've submitted their application. And this is really kind of the deep interaction with either the specific post-secondary institution they're going to, or maybe multiple, depending on if they're exploring their options. So these are the main areas we'll be exploring today. We'll also have time for resources. We'll be sharing some updates. And then we'll be looking to get feedback from you all. So in our closing and evaluation process. Next slide. All right, and then so our specific outcomes for the day. So by the time you leave here, we want to ensure that folks have a better understanding of the financial aid process after their FAFSA or WASFA submission. We'll get a chance to review sample award letters to understand the different components included. We'll provide access to student and family resources, hopefully to support you in your own financial aid process. And we'll share best practices and strategies. And hopefully folks will get a chance to share a little bit about what they have going on at their own organization and maybe share some promising practices that they are building within their own organization. Next slide. And so for this slide, Dinda, if you could go ahead and get ready to launch our poll for the group. There we go. So we want to know about, oh, actually, sorry, the poll came a little early, but we'll get started. I jumped the gun, but go ahead, answer the poll. We want to know about how comfortable you are with financial aid. We also want to know who's in the room. So as you're filling out that poll, go ahead and enter in the chat what your name, position, and organization is. And let's see. Yeah, let us know your name, position, organization. While you're doing that, we're going to take a chance to introduce ourselves and let you all know who's going to be presenting today. So again, as I mentioned, my name is Christian Granlin. I'm interim director of post-secondary programs at Puget Sound Educational Service District. And I will pass it off to Christina.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christina Winstead, she, her pronouns, and I am with the Washington Student Achievement Council. I work with the 12th year campaign. The 12th year campaign is a program that supports counselors and those CBOs, anyone who is supporting students with the financial process who is doing this free of charge. We have resources, we have workbooks and postcards. We're talk all about those. And so as the associate director with CAI, I'm just super excited to be here today to provide those resources. And I will pass it off to Dinda.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dinda Davis. I'm the program coordinator for PSCCN. I support PSCCN with some of the communications around financial aid. And I work with Christian at the ESD for the PSCCN program. I'll pass it on to Stan.
Thanks, Dinda. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Washington. I am the assistant director with
Uh-oh, did we lose Sam?
It looks like we lost Sam, but that's okay. We can.
Oh, wait, I
He's
still see Sam. You still
He's
there?
back. Yeah.
I have to apologize. My Zoom is having difficulties this morning. I may need to ask one of my colleagues to drive the presentation for us. But as I was saying, my name is Sam Washington. I am an assistant director with the College Access Initiatives Division of the Washington Student Achievement Council. I support Christina and Yasleen, who you will meet in a moment, in running the 12th year campaign, providing
one that we've been going to. Oh,
And
this is another one.
support the college-bound side of the Washington Student Achievement Council in running our text messaging service, Otterbot, that supports students throughout the state with making that transition after high school, as well as a parent bot, which we're getting ready to launch here. Some of you may have received an email about that yesterday, but our parent bot, which is also going to support students as well. So happy to be here this morning. I'll pass it off to Yasleen.
Okay, hopefully y'all can hear me over the power tools outside. But my name is Yasleen and I work with Christina and Sam at WASFA, and I partner with them in the 12th year campaign. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Well, thank you for your introductions. And thank you for bearing with us through the technical challenges. Can folks see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, awesome. We'll keep it moving then. So in this next piece, folks have already done this. You've gone ahead and entered in the poll on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not comfortable at all, and 5 being I can do this presentation, make me the presenter. We got a pretty solid bell curve. So let me go ahead and share those results. All right, are folks able to see those results? And hopefully you see your answer reflected in there. And then we'll run this again, and hopefully we've shifted more towards the 3, 4s, and 5s. So appreciate folks filling that out, seeing where we're beginning, and looking forward to learning some things as we go today. All right, so I will pass it off to you, Christina, for some general updates.
So for general updates, I just wanted to make sure that we put these at the top, but that it's not what our whole presentation is going to be on, because one of the updates, next slide, please, is that the financial aid application is going to change next year. So with FAFSA simplification, which means that we will also be adapting the WASFA. So both applications will have changes to them, that with the FAFSA Simplification Act, that our class of 2024 will be the first group of students using what they're calling the simplified FAFSA. And so I just wanted to make sure that we are that everyone knows that there are changes coming. And I wanted to make sure just to talk about it for a second, but not like we have other trainings that are going to be on this. So I just wanted to make sure you all know that there's lots of opportunities. And so next slide, please. So basically what's going to happen is this is the largest overhaul in the financial aid application in 40 years. It's huge. It is changing concepts in the application. It's going to change the needs analysis, but there's going to be lots of resources and trainings on this. So I didn't want anyone to worry, because you might be hearing about it more and more. Next slide, please. So there's going to be a couple changes for FSAID. So right now you'll see those changes already enacted. There's a 2-step verification. There's backup codes for your students. And we've already adapted our FSAID and worksheet that has the FSAID worksheet on one side and your WAFSA account creation on the other. We've already updated it to include that. There's the backup code, so students can access their account if they lose their information, so they don't have access to their email anymore. We know that's been a challenge. And starting for next year, everybody, including all parents, including undocumented parents, will create an FSAID. And they're working on the process of what that would look like to verify identity for the FSAID. So for the 24-25 FAFSA, there will no longer be standalone signature pages that we have to send in. And then there's just going to be some changes to the form as well. There's going to be changes to who the parent is. They're going to get the Data retrieval tool is going to change to an automatic income information exchange. The student aid index is going to be replacing the EFC. So there will no longer be an EFC, there'll be an SAI, and there's different ways they're going to calculate student need. And then, like I said, the parent is going to change. It's going to be who is providing the most financial support. There's going to be some changes to assets as well and exemptions from assets. So just those are the coming attractions. As soon as we know more from federal student aid, we'll have a training for y'all. And then next slide, please. There are lots of resources. So one thing I will say is with all of this, that there is a potential that the financial aid application for the class of 2024 may not be released in October. It may have a delayed release of the application. And so there's lots of resources. As soon as we know more, the Padlet will have information, and then we'll have trainings for you where you'll be able to, just like our other trainings for Aim Higher Washington, we'll walk through line by line what it looks like. They're building a whole new platform based upon student experience that the application will be hosted on. Next slide.
Remind counselors in the room that College Bound a few years ago moved to the auto enrollment process. It was a great boon for the College Bound Scholarship Program. It removed barriers for a lot of students in accessing that program. But with that change came the need for an update. And so we wanted to make sure we reminded everyone that you know, it's important that you visit the wasac.wa.gov/collegebound website and helped your students by providing their updated contact information. So that way, when it comes time for them to sit down, fill out their financial aid application, they will be matched properly with their College Bound Scholarship award. And so this is going to impact the class of 2024. So it's never too early to hop in and start getting that information up to date as soon as you can. Next slide, please.
Okay, just a residency reminder. Just as a reminder in general, I know most of y'all know this, but I just, as many times as I can say it, you don't have to have citizenship in the United States in order to receive Washington state aid. Undocumented students in Washington state can get Washington state aid. I think the more we norm that, the less I'll hear that as rumors is that like, oh, undocumented students can't get aid. That's not the case. In Washington, you just have to be a resident, which means you have to live in Washington, have a residence for 1 year prior to having your residency determined by a college. And so these are the new requirements as of, it's been about 1.5 years now. In the past, it was that 3-year wait period, and we know how hard that was for our students. But the new law in 2021 replaced House Bill 1079, reducing that and aligning it more with the residency status of getting residency in Washington. So one rainy, maybe a couple inches of snow/ice, definitely a fiery season in there. One of those spins around the globe and you're one of us. So I just want to let you all know. And then those students are eligible for Washington state aid, potentially depending on their income, but they're also eligible for residency rates at the college. Next slide, please. Okay, undocumented students and other select applicants for the WAFSA. So I just want to also let everyone know that there are other select applicants for the WAFSA. So you might have students that you're working with who are eligible for federal funding, but do not want to pursue federal funding for a multitude of reasons. And so if a student's eligible for the FAFSA, if they want to apply for the FAFSA to maximize their aid, but if they do not want to apply for the FAFSA for their own reasons, they can go ahead and use the WAFSA instead. And so I find this with sometimes families that are mixed status, for adults who are coming back to school that maybe have owed on federal grants or loans that are in default, not the default that we're all experiencing right now, but they have defaulted loans previously, they're still able to receive state aid in those cases. Just wanted to do a reminder there. Next slide. And then the calculator. I love our calculator. The FAFSA forecaster is great, like the tool that they have now, but it still asks a lot of questions. If a student really quickly wants to know how much they might be getting for financial aid, it's It's super easy. It's 3 questions: the size of your family, how many are going to college, and how much you made last year. And it's gonna be able to tell them what to expect from Washington State alone. So this is a great tool to use with your students who are saying, we're not getting financial aid. Next slide.
All right, so we are going to do a quick overview of the verification process. And we are going to take a quick little virtual interlude here before we dive into it. But we want you to share in the chat, what is your biggest concern or challenge when helping students through verification? So we want to hear from you. What are the things that you're experiencing? They may be new things that are specific to this year, or maybe specific to a role. But hopefully in that sharing, we can kind of learn from each other. And then as we're doing that, I will pass it back to you, Christina, and we can dive into some of the details around the verification process.
Okay, I see them rolling in. Helping students get a tax transcript. We're going to talk about that today. That is one of those challenges. And don't worry, the links, I see a couple. I'm trying to respond as I talk, and man, I am not good at doing both at the same time. And so if I don't respond to your question right away, no worries. We'll make sure that you get all the links that we have available today. Notaries, yeah. Understanding what the student needs, and when they ask for questions, like what are they being asked for? More paperwork, yeah. And what to do when parents don't complete their taxes, even though they're required to, can be challenging. And so for verification, these are great. A lot of these can be challenging, but we have some resources to help you today as you navigate your students through verification. And so we're going to start with the basics, though, because not all of us have done verification. This might be your first financial aid cycle, and you're like, verify what? Verification. So verification, it's pretty much simply the process in which the federal government on FAFSAs verifies that information is correct and accurate. So they are just making sure, and for the schools as well, the FAFSA has their way of picking, but there's also the schools can pick this as well. So it's part of the application process. And I think we need to norm that with students, that verification, that really it's a part of the process. I got picked for verification while working at the college, and they're like, verify how much you made last year. And I'm like, y'all paid me last week. But they're like, no, you have to go through the actual process. So it's part of the process for students that they go through. Not all of them, but some will go through to verify their information. It typically requires action in the form of completing an additional form or providing supplemental documentation. Parents may have to provide information, students may have to provide information, or both. The most critical piece about verification is ensuring that students check their emails or their portals or anything that the school sends them. So if they send them a postcard, a letter, a portal notification, an email, I don't care if they send a pigeon with a little note tied to its leg that says you've been picked for verification, no matter how they reach out to the student is responsible to complete this process. Students who do not complete the verification process are unable to receive their aid. They're not able to distribute funds until verification is completed. And financial aid officers hate that. It breaks their heart when they can't provide those funds. Next step or slide. Okay, so who gets picked for verification? I'm hearing that it's less than 18%, but it's typically been around between 18 and 30% of students who are picked for verification. They can be picked randomly. It could just be a random poll. And so it can be through institutional verification. The federal government can flag FAFSAs and say this one's picked for verification randomly. The colleges, they may pull a student for verification to verify information. And what I have found with that case is if they see something that doesn't match. So I had a student They filled out their income information. Their parents filled out their income information. And the thing is the student and the parent, when the parent filled out how much they had in assets and how much they made, the student was like, we're a family, filled it out separate from the parents. We're a family. And so if my parent made $30,000, I made $30,000, and they basically duplicated the income. And the financial aid office looked at that and went, what 18-year-old's making $30,000 right now? And like only in a short period, like they worked for 2 months. I'm in the wrong job. And so they pulled it and found out that the student accidentally duplicated the income. So instead of them having a full family income of 60, they dropped it down to the correct one, and then they were eligible for that gift aid. So federal selection, if they pick you, you are required to provide that documentation. This institution, when they pick you, it's the school, just the school themselves. So for the federal selection, any of the schools a student's applying to, they have to complete the verification process. If the institution picks the student, the institution itself is just asking for that information. It doesn't mean if they apply to 5 schools that they have to send all that to 5 schools. No matter which one, they're going to contact the student to let them know they've been picked for verification. And let me tell you, sometimes I know that our financial aid offices are very stretched for staffing right now, and they don't always constantly connect with that student. They may send one notification. So students want to make sure if they don't know the process, it's okay to reach out to the financial aid office. Next slide. So a little more of the details. The information they're going to be asking for is typically financial information. And sometimes they're also looking for verification of the number in household or the household size of that household. They're typically going to ask for IRS tax return transcripts, which is different than the taxes themselves. Tax transcripts, I will say they are easier right now to get than they were a couple years ago. I know that last year there was challenges getting it, and the year before, like you even had to wait to get into the website. If you can get, and there's a couple different ways you can get it, and we'll talk about that. Sometimes they want copies of the parent's W-2, but typically it's the tax transcript that they're looking at. They're also looking for those who are, like if you have adult students you're working with and they didn't file taxes, if they're not getting a tax transcript and they didn't file taxes because they don't have to, they can request a letter of non-filing that verifies that that student or that family didn't file taxes that year. Now, when they say non-filing, I just want to clarify for financial aid purposes, when they give you a couple options when you're filling out the FAFSA that says for your taxes that you're going to file, that you filed, or not going to file. When you select not going to file, they mean by that determination is that you're not going to file because you're not required to file. If you select I'm just not going to file because I'm not filing, and you made enough money to file, they're still going to pick you for verification and ask about tax information. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the obstacles. Timing. Oh my goodness. One time I had a student when I worked at the community college, they came into my office. They had this letter that they pulled out of their backpack that looked like it had been on quite the journey. And they just put it on my desk and said, what is this about? It was sealed. So like, I'm not psychic. So I was like, well, let's open it up and find out. And I tried to give the student the benefit of the doubt. I was like, maybe they opened it. They read it, they didn't understand it, they put it back in their backpack, it got wet and it resealed. Maybe that's what happened. But unfortunately, no, the student never opened up the letter. So we opened it together with some chocolate because chocolate helps everything. And I saw the postmark before I opened it, and I saw that that postmark was like from 6 weeks ago. And we opened the letter, it says, you've been picked for verification. You have 4 weeks to provide the following information so we can process your application in time for tuition due date. The student was there because their tuition hadn't been paid. They never completed the verification process because they didn't know, because they never opened the letter, but the school still notified them. So timing wise, that student, they ended up paying out of pocket. They were reimbursed, but they had to pay out of pocket to meet the tuition due date. We want to make sure that students, when they're picked for verification, any sort of correspondence they get from the college, if there's an actionable component to it, that they work on it as soon as possible. And the reason why it's important to be timely is because it does take more time to receive some of those documents from the IRS if you can't use the ID.me system. which is the system that they use to verify who you are to provide documents from the IRS immediately versus requesting items to be sent to you. There's also confusion on what they need to submit. These aren't commonly known documents. Tax transcripts aren't commonly known. And some of the things they might be asking for, it's very easy to mix them up with other things. And then confusion on what's required. Like if they don't have to file, what are they providing? What's going to show that their income? And this can be challenging. I encourage students, this is my I encourage students and their families to order a tax transcript at the beginning of the financial aid season through the IRS when they are doing their FAFSA. When they're filing their FAFSA, it's very easy to go in and manually request through their system a tax transcript be sent to them without the ID.me system. If you do it that way, then it's waiting there for you. You can put it in the file with your taxes, and if you get picked for verification, you just pull those forms after the fact. That is just an easier way, I find, just to have them already on hand if you get picked for verification. They just need to check their portals. Make sure students are checking their email. I know you can't force them to, but like they need to get used to checking their email that they have sent to the school on a regular basis or the portal of the college that they're going to attend. And if they get stuck at all, just have them reach out to the financial aid office because they are there to support the students. Again, it breaks their heart when they can't disperse funds because they haven't met all the process requirements. I would always assume you're going to submit something, whether it's going to be a form or supporting documentation. There's going to be some sort of component of follow-up the student's going to have to take if they're picked for verification. Next slide. So tax transcripts, how to order them. So I have found, depending on the volume of work at the IRS, that at times there is a delay to even access the website. I haven't seen it this year, but last year, I just want to be very upfront and honest. Last year, I did see it where you would try to log in and it would make you wait to get in like you were getting like StubHub tickets or something. And so if that's the case, I just encourage people, Pacenza, be patient and get into the system. For requesting a tax transcript online or a letter of non-filing, the online instant way is going to be the quickest, but then a student also, if they don't qualify for this, they can also just put in their information and have one sent to them manually. That takes, I do it once a year just to see how long it's taking our students. And so I ordered one in January. It took 3 weeks. And I had it on my doorstep. So just an idea of how long it's taking to get a tax transcript in the mail right now. It's just one of those things that I do. I'm sure it drives them crazy. So if you're able to get your own online, here's the problem I'm finding is that they have to identify, like they have to verify their identity with ID.me, and that requires identity documents and a selfie. So you have to have like credit cards and bills and certain things in your name. And the challenge I'm finding with that is a lot of our families don't have those documents. They're not on those accounts and are unable to use that process. But for some, they are, and it's just an instant report that they can pull up if they use that. Also, I want to respect people's decisions on how data is used, and like not everyone feels comfortable with submitting a selfie and an identity document. And I 100% get that. It's an individual choice, and that's why there's the other option. And so if we want to just go ahead to the next slide. And that's the alternative to requesting a transcript online. They're going to mail it to you. So it's a form. You just click get transcript by mail. You're going to fill out information, including your ITIN or your social security number. You're going to request the type of document that you want. It says it arrives in 5 to 10 calendar days. Like I said, it took 3 weeks. And so they can request these if they don't use the ID.me system. This is just an easier way. It just takes a little bit longer. I have found the other thing with the ID.me is that it's not very, like if you're using assistive technology, e-readers, things like that, it's really challenging to use. And it really is up to individuals on how they want their information, if they want that information given to them via instantly or sent in the mail. I know like for my area, like I prefer the digital because we have a lot of mail theft. Like it's like a good hit and miss every week where our mailboxes are open. So I don't feel comfortable having documents sent to my house now that could identify me and be used in other ways. So it's really up to individual families on how they want to use this. Next slide. Okay, so just reminders and resources. So you have the tax transcript information now. Again, if you can have your have families do it as one of their processes, their steps at the beginning of the financial aid process, I think it makes it a lot easier to norm this. So reminding students and parents to act as quickly as possible, know what their deadlines are, know that it takes a little bit of time to get that paperwork. Provide this information. They want to provide consistent information. So what they put on their financial aid application, they're looking that it matches on their verification. And so if they say on their financial aid application, we have a family of 4, but then the student puts in on the verification paperwork, we have a family of 6, they're looking to see that this all matches. And if not, they're going to ask more questions, which is fine because they're wanting to get an accurate assessment of the family's ability to pay. It doesn't mean anyone's done anything wrong. I have literally had students tell me, I got picked for verification. This is just a sign that I shouldn't go to college. It breaks my heart. It causes me a lot of extra gray hairs. No one's done anything wrong. And if they have, they typically haven't done it wrong intentionally. It's just that they sometimes add an extra 0 to things. But it just means that you've been randomly picked by the government to provide additional information. It's not on anybody, but unfortunately, they do have to provide that information. Again, if federal requests are not fulfilled, they cannot disperse funding to the student. And so that can be really heartbreaking if the student has that money waiting there, but they just didn't complete the process. There's resources at the PSCCN website. 12th Year Campaign has resources as well. I just encourage you when you're working with students to norm the fact that they might be picked for verification, that nothing was done wrong, but they do have the responsibility in order to complete their application fully to get this information in. Next slide. Okay, and with all of that, and I know it's a lot of information all at once, but think about what has worked for you in the past in supporting students. So I want to hear from you all. Are there things that have worked for you in the past when you're supporting students through verification? What resources can we provide to you? What can we develop this upcoming year that might help you better support students through the verification process? And what questions do you have about verification? And I see some that came in, and when I'm not presenting, I promise I will be tippy typing and making sure you have that information. But go ahead and feel free to use the chat. Is there something that you've done that works really well for you to support your students in verification? Share that with the group, because I learned just as much from you all in these as us providing the information as well. And I'll give people a minute to type. And then next, we're going to talk about award letters. And I do see some of your questions about the process. When it comes to parents who don't fill out taxes for the federal verification, it's going to be challenging. If they were required to fill out taxes but didn't for a number of reasons, it does become challenging to disperse federal aid. And so that can be definitely a roadblock. Step-by-step guides. Awesome. Yeah, we'd be happy to look at providing more of a step-by-step for students. What's the best way to support students from the high school is really supporting, advocating for them getting the information they need when it comes to the tax transcript for their parents, making that as easy as possible for a parent to complete the process. And so sometimes it also means if you're having like a follow-up financial aid night or a scholarship night, providing that as a way to saying, parents, if you need tax transcripts because your student was picked for verification, you know, in our computer lab, we're helping with scholarships, but we're also helping you obtain your tax transcripts. Being prepared by ordering ahead of time. Yeah, I think that I find that that's really easy, because also tax season, like right now during verification, it's also tax season. And so it takes a lot longer to get those documents during their heavy business times. When it's in the fall, less taxes, less processing being done. So it seems to happen a lot quicker. Like I literally got my tax transcript in a week in September. So maybe this is a component we do when we're working with parents on their FSA IDs. Currently, we do not have a way for you to see who's picked for verification in the FAFSA completion portal. I would love to see it too. It's something I would love to see, and it's something that we're trying. So let me see who said that. Oh, Marcy, yes, it's something that we're working on seeing if we could have available, but it's something we currently don't have. So for tax transcripts, yes, you order them through the IRS specifically. It's not a component of the FAFSA. It does not cost money. It's free to get a tax transcript, and that's why I suggest getting them early. Intentional support for first generation students going through this process, I think, is critical. The parents may not understand you've asked for so much stuff and now you're asking for one more thing. Being able to support the student and the parent through this process is really helpful. Yes, it's free to order them. And I want to be mindful of time. So I'm going to start answering some of these online, and we'll go ahead and jump to award letters if that works for y'all. And so I will bring up Dinda.
Thank you, Christina. And so award letters, this is a great time to remind students to accept their award letters. Just because they are awarded funds, if they do not accept that, then they might not have the funds that they are looking for. So the first round of award letters will come in March. Actually, today will start coming in the month of March, but then they'll continue through May. So just in case a student hasn't gotten their award letter in March, that doesn't mean that they haven't been awarded. There's still other award letters coming. Next slide. Students should be on the lookout for the official notice, because it will outline the student's financial aid award package. One thing to note is schools may have different names for these award letters. Some might call them financial aid offer, merit letter, award letter, or financial aid package. All these names mean the same thing. So the key thing is to make sure that students are aware of what to look out for. Next slide. Some key points for award letters. There's no standard format, so these award letters can look different depending on the school they are coming from, which makes it difficult to compare award letters school by school. But the college financing sheet should be able to help with that. And then school policies and available resources also impact award. Private schools have a lot more resources to award school-based grants to students, while state colleges and CTCs have limited amount of funding they can offer. And then also eligibility plays a part in certain programs. So students, the amount of federal student aid a student can get is limited to Pell and federal supplemental educational opportunity grants, which is mostly awarded to low income brackets or foster kids. If a student is eligible for college-bound scholarship, that may also look different for them. And then schools can produce award letters at varying times, as we have talked about. Some arrive as soon as the offer of admission or after. Others require verification to be completed. So it just depends on what's going on with the application, with the student's application. Also, always remind the students the award offer is just an offer. They may request modification if there is a change in their circumstances, They might adjust the loan or work expectation. They might adjust outside aid expectations, like if they get scholarship awards and things like that. They might not need all the loans that are coming in. Next slide, please. Now here's the fun part. So let's just see, let's just test our knowledge on this. This is a warm-up activity that you can also use with your students to see how they're understanding financial aid. So the first question is true or false. Once I receive my financial aid award letter, I can still appeal for more aid. Is that true or false? Okay, everyone got this right. Yes, it is true. One can appeal for more aid. The worst case is that the institution might just say no. Appeals are typically reserved for specific situations and circumstances. There is federal and state guidance about that, about what they consider to be special circumstances when it comes to rectifying that. Next slide. Your financial aid award letter should tell you exactly, you should tell you everything except A, how much aid you will receive in loans, how much, I see people already answering that, how much aid you will receive in scholarships, how much aid you will receive for your second year in college, how much you owe independent of the financial aid package. Great, the answer is C. A student should apply for financial aid every year. They will receive a financial aid award every year they apply. So once you apply, you have to do it again the next year. The next slide, true or false. Anyone can receive work study. That's correct. Work study is income eligible and allows students to work part-time while attending college. Students will need to assess whether or not this is a good option for them because working actually does cut into their study time or prepping for other things. So they have to be able to see how they can manage their time with added work on. Having said that, students who take advantage of this program have the skills to balance their time accordingly. So chapter 4 of the college knowledge, understanding financial aid award letters, can help them with that as well. And they can get a copy of that on our website, PSCCN. And then also after this training, I will follow up with an email with all the resources that we have shared thus far, as well as those to come. I'll hand it off to Sam for more on award letters.
Mentioned, students will be receiving their award letters, and there are a few things that they'll be asked to do once they receive them. But this can be kind of hard and also kind of daunting for students, since every award letter, as Dinda mentioned, is going to look different from school to school. So it's important for them to be able to learn what to identify on the award letter, so that way they know what the important things are they should be considering. The common components of an award letter include the cost of attendance, which is essentially how much which a combination of indirect and direct costs are going to be given to the student in order to pay for a year of attending school. They also will see the EFC, which is the expected family contribution. They'll see the different awards that they'll be given from the school or other scholarships that they may have applied for. These are classified as gift aid, financial aids that don't need to be paid back. And then they'll also see unmet need, which is that remaining amount they'll need to pay for in order to cover that cost of attendance. And then they'll also see broken down other options for meeting that unmet need. I've seen in the chat some folks asking about loans and about accepting certain forms of aid and declining others. And so this is where that might take place based on what a student's circumstance is. And I'll go into these in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. Next one, please. So first off, your estimated or the student's estimated cost of attendance is a combination of indirect costs, which include things like books, personal expenses, transportation costs, and direct costs, which are things like the cost of the classes themselves, tuitions, fees, and if a student is living on campus, room and board or housing and meal plans, as it's more commonly referred to. Now, your students' indirect costs are variable. Things like books can go up and down based on what the costs of those books are. And there are things like rental programs out there that you can encourage your students to look towards so that they don't accrue those overall costs when they don't need to. A lot of schools will also have things like book share programs where students will purchase the book and then they're able to turn around and sell them to another student who is going to be taking that class as well. So there are a bunch of different ways to help adjust some of those indirect costs to make going to school more affordable. And then for the direct costs, things like the cost of tuition, room and board, those things also have a little bit of wiggle room to them as well. Tuition for some classes that students may take may not require them to pay fees. Those are commonly associated with things that have labs involved, the sciences, where you need to pay additional lab fees in order to participate in that portion of the class, whereas others are just lecture-based. You go sit in the classroom, listen to the professor speak. Those tend not to have those lab fees associated with them. And then for something like room and board, students can choose to adjust their living situation on campus to maybe a less expensive option. I know for me, when I started out at my university, I was in a triple, which was probably the least expensive option out there. But then as I got older, as I progressed through my career in college, I wanted my own space. I wanted a little bit more privacy for myself. And so made the choice to pay a little bit more money to get a single. But it's things like that that students have a little bit of wiggle room with to make their cost of attendance fit their particular circumstance. Next slide, please. So when it comes to looking at the financial aid award letter, this is typically how you may see it broken down or how students may see it broken down. They'll have their direct costs lumped together and bracketed out so that way students know these are the things that they are going to be required to pay for because it is a necessity of attending classes and living on campus. And then they'll have a second bucket, which are those indirect costs, things I mentioned like books, the supplies for the classes, transportation costs. These things are required by the schools to distribute to the students so that way they know, in addition to what they may be needing in financial aid, there are also other things they should be considering while they live on campus. Are they going to need to go off campus to work? Those are additional transportation costs. Are they going to need additional supplies in order to stay organized for their classrooms? That might be additional supply costs. So those are those things that students will look at on their financial aid award letters. And it's important for them to be aware that those are, flexible costs that they can work on to maybe make the cost of attendance a little bit more affordable for them. Go to the next one, please. Oh yes, and here's the boxes that go around each of those buckets I was mentioning. So for the gift aid, grants and scholarships, these are typically student financial aid types that don't need to be repaid. Grants are typically need-based and are awarded by the schools as well as federally. And then there are also scholarships that can be need-based, but these can also be merit-based as well. So if a student is going for a particular career, there may be scholarships available for them. If they have any specific talents or skills or abilities that they're going to school for, maybe they are in a performance art, maybe they're a student athlete. There are also scholarships that are available in that way as well. Now, it's important to note, occasionally students may need to pay back part or all of a grant that they may be receiving. I know that kind of is contradictory to what I said before, but this will only happen in certain circumstances. For example, if a student withdraws from school before finishing out the semester, they may need to pay back that grant for not completing that semester. So there are certain rules that go along with grants and scholarships that students will want to be aware of. The different grants and scholarships, just like the estimated costs and the unmet need that I mentioned, they'll all be listed out on the student's award letter. It looks kind of like a receipt. You see the line item, and then next to it, you see the actual amount of money that's associated with that line item. So that may be a helpful way to break it down to students as well. One of the other things that I wanted to mention in this part is as you are helping your students through this process and you're looking for that state financial aid, like the Washington College Grant or the College Bound Scholarship, you're going to see different amounts for every student, even if they are applying for the same school and their circumstances may be very similar. That's because the awarding practices of the school will change how the financial aid award letter looks for each student. So for one student, you may see a higher amount of College Bound Scholarship than Washington College Grant, and vice versa. It's just because of awarding practices. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the award letters. And if there really are any additional questions that you may have, that's a great opportunity for students to contact the financial aid office and get a little bit more detail about how these awardings work and make sure everything is covered the way it should be. Go to the next slide. And then the other thing that I mentioned is the unmet need. As students look at the cost of attendance, as well as the different gift aids they will be receiving, they'll be left with what's called the unmet need. And this unmet need is where the students will see different types of financial aid supports that they may be eligible for based on their financial aid application to help them meet that cost. This can look like loans, work study, or contributions by the student themselves or family to help pay that unmet need. We'll flip over to the next slide. So for unmet need, those will also be listed off to the side, separate from those types of gift aid that students are going to be receiving. As I mentioned, there are things like work study. When it comes to the loans they could receive, those are also going to be broken out based on the different types of loans they may be eligible for. And then there's also additionally the option of family contributions. So it's important for students to know these are all just different buckets, different options for them to meet that unmet need. But then one thing that isn't going to be listed on here is also the opportunity for students to go out and receive additional financial aid through scholarship opportunities. We talk about it all the time. The search process is a little tedious, a little taxing for students. But once they receive their financial aid award letter and they know what that amount is for unmet need, it can be a little bit easier to put a dollar amount next to what a student should be looking for in terms of scholarships. And say they need $1,000 more, they can knock that out with several smaller scholarships, as opposed to just trying to get one very large scholarship that might be available to them. Right. There, I'll hand it off to Christina.
Yeah, so let's talk about EFC. Now, I want to preface this with the EFC is going to be the EFC for this year, and then next year it's going to we're no longer going to be using what we call an EFC, and so it'll move to the student aid index. So this is for this school year, but the class of 2024 will have a different term. Don't worry, again, we're going to have trainings and resources and supports. I just wish I could send you all goodie baskets of like chocolate and we just go over financial aid. Until I can send digital chocolate, you just get information from me right now. But the EFC is a combination of the expected parent contribution and the expected student contribution, and together those calculate out the expected family contribution. This is not a bill. So I think families will see this and go, oh my goodness, this is how much I have to pay. It is not a bill. It is one of those components that they use to determine what a family can pay for. And there are other ways to pay for their education using scholarships and things like that. It's calculated, that is the calculation I would show you, but there are so many pages of it. Those of us who've worked in financial aid, I've seen some of y'all in the chat. I know which ones y'all have been in financial aid before, know that it is a very lengthy calculation. And so you can find, if you're like me and you're like, please tell me what the whole calculation is, it's on the Federal Student Aid webpage. And so the lower the EFC typically is the more amount of gift aid that a student's going to receive. A 0 EFC is not a full ride. I think that's a misconception. When someone sees 0 EFC, they're like, oh, everything's covered. That is also not the case. The student may still have unmet need, even if they have a 0 EFC. And this can vary from year to year. So the EFC changes year to year for students, depending on their family situation. Next slide. So let's dive a little bit deeper. We're going to have a sample award letter here in a second. But when working with students on award letters, I don't know about y'all, but you might also like highlighters and office supplies like I do. So I get out highlighters when I'm working with students on their award letters because I want them to be able to highlight what is the amount of gift aid offered to them, what are the loans, and how much they owe. And so usually I get like a green highlighter, a yellow highlighter, and pink because red is really scary. And so for gift aid, I have them highlight all the gift aid. And so if we look at the next slide, I have them look at, here's the cost of attendance. What is the gift aid and scholarships that they're receiving? And I have them highlight those in green because we want them to accept them. We want to make sure they're accepting gift aid first over anything else. We want them to know about their loan options because those are going to be bundled into the award letter as well. And we want to make sure, so I always want to caution though with loans because the student may not need all of those extra loans. They may need a specific amount, but they may not need exactly what the school has given them. And so I always tell students, my guidance is take what you need, but not what you want. We want this to be an awesome opportunity for you, but man, let my generation be the generation that took out every single type of loan possible. And we want your generation to use all the gift aid first and all the other resources so that you have the least amount of debt as possible in the financial aid process. So we have those loans. We do, like I always highlight them in orange or a different color that kind of says caution, pause. We're going to come back to this. So they're gift aid first and then additional aid opportunities. So if they have work study, like if they feel comfortable working, yes, please have them consider work study. I don't know about y'all who are in this room right now, but if you were a work study student, think about what your experience was. I know for me, work study meant the difference between me working a job that respected my goal as a student to achieve my education versus in food service, they call you in. They don't care if you got a chem test. They don't care if you have class. And if you skip a shift, even if you weren't on the schedule for the shift, maybe someone called out sick and they tried to call you in my experience, then they would do something where like the next week your hours got cut. And it was really hard for me to keep a balance between being a student and being an employee in retail and food service. When I was a work study, they asked me, hey, do you want to take the week of finals off? Oh my goodness. So you can study and be ready for your finals. It was the best ever. They respected that role and my goals. And so work study is an awesome opportunity to help contribute to your education. It's a paycheck that they get, but mine paid for my textbooks. That's how I paid for textbooks every quarter was I got work study and also some pizza. Let's not kid ourselves. It also paid for pizza, but pizza and textbooks. And it was a great way for me to pay for my education. The other aid opportunity are things like Parent Plus loans, but that is up to the parent to decide whether they want to take a loan in the student's name. So we want students to think about their direct costs and their indirect costs. For their indirect costs, what are the ways that they can reduce those costs of education? Maybe they're going to get used books instead of new. Maybe they're going to get the cheaper parking permit. There's a lot of options to slowly, not one thing is going to cut it all, but there's going to be things that make it a little bit more affordable for the student to go. Then have them reassess those loans to see what their total cost of attendance is going to be at their unmet need and how much they might need to take out in loans to cover that. The highlighter really helps for me. I just personally, I don't know, feel free to use it if you want, but I just think making sure that students accept their gift aid before. I've had students who are like, they know what a loan is. They think they have to take it and they take it before they take a grant because they don't know grants or gift aid. And then all of a sudden they're in a situation where they have money. They could have had money that was gift aid and now they're taking out a loan for it. And I would hate to have students do that. And next, I'm going to pass it off to Sam to talk about appeals and revisions. What do we do when students' situations have changed?
Over the last few years, we know that things have changed for a lot of our students. And so after doing all of their due diligence for everything that Christina mentioned with reviewing the award letters, they still might find that that isn't enough support and they may need additional help from the school itself to reevaluate their circumstance. So that's where the appeals and revision process comes in. Now, before I dive too much into the details about it, I also want to make sure to note that for a lot of universities and institutions, they may have different vernacular that they use around this process. So it's important that the student learns about that, how it works for the school. Some schools will use the term award revision versus an appeal. An appeal may be a change in status, whereas an award revision is exactly that, a change in their award letter. So that's kind of the first hurdle that students may need to tackle, is just coming to terms with the terms that the university uses to talk about these different things. Now, once they've gone through all of that process, what does it mean for a student to go through the appeals process? Say you've applied and are disappointed, or say the student has applied and they're disappointed with the financial aid package, and they feel they should be granted more based on their circumstances, or perhaps, some significant, financial situation has changed with their family, a loss of income, unforeseen expenses for home or family care, different kinds of things may come up. This is where a student is going to want to engage with the financial aid appeals process with the school that they're looking at attending. Now, it's important to reassure students as they work through this process, a college will not rescind an application just because they are appealing the financial aid letter. There's no point of shame. There's nothing wrong with the student asking for the support they need. That's actually one of the areas we want to start normalizing or work on normalizing with our students, to ask for the support that they need. But it is also important to keep in mind that as a student goes through this process, an appeal is not a guarantee that they will receive more financial aid from the financial aid office. The financial aid office is going to go through those circumstances, going to go through the appeal letters, and they're going to do everything they can to reassess the student to see where support can be given. But again, it's not a for sure thing. Appeals are typically reserved for specific sets of circumstances, and there are guidances that financial aid offices need to follow. We'll have a resource here in a few slides that can help students get the language down to provide their information in a way that works for the financial aid offices. But it's really important that they know they're going to have to provide a bit more information. And Christina has also put the link to the resource in the chat that we'll be talking about here in a bit. So let's head to the next slide. So there are two considerations that financial aid offices will make when looking at a student's ability to appeal their award letter. Either special circumstances, or the award office themselves, or the financial aid office themselves, will look at doing a professional judgment of the student circumstance. These are two words that are thrown around, and there are, as I mentioned, federal regulations and guidances around these through the Department of Ed. That's something that if you as an educator want to read up on, there's definitely a lot of information available on that. But some circumstances that would amount to a valid request are a loss of income or significant changes in family income or assets, additional tuitions that are being paid for elementary school tuition, secondary tuition, or a family member who is also paying post-secondary tuition, medical expenses, dental expenses, those sorts of things. They have been more the norm lately with what we've been through over the past few years. So those are circumstances that financial aid offices can take into account. And then last but certainly not least, unusually high childcare. It's been a point of contention for a lot of families who need to go back to work, whose students do need that level of support and care. And those costs may be unusually high and not reflected in the financial aid awarding process. And so these are just some ways that students and families can appeal for more financial aid, but there are certainly more out there. We encourage you to chat with the financial aid offices to make sure you go through that whole process with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they are supported the way they need to be. Let's go to the next slide. So the other thing that I mentioned are professional judgments. Financial aid administrators can exercise professional judgments to determine when situations warrant an appeal beyond what is typically there. For students who may be self-supporting, for students who may be in circumstances where they're not in contact because of safety concerns with their parents, those sorts of situations are perfect, are ideal for students to receive professional judgments from the financial aid offices. We want to make sure the students' safety is paramount. It's at the forefront. And to put them at risk just to fill out a financial aid form is certainly not worth it. And the financial aid offices understand this as well. So these are some, that is one or a couple of reasons why, you know, professional judgments may be exercised by the schools themselves. There is also opportunities for students to be reconsidered for things like loans, like work study, as opposed to just receiving more gift aid. So it's not just additional gift aid that may be awarded. It may be an opportunity for a student to take a work study position to cover maybe that little bit left of need, unmet aid that they have to pay for. So when it comes to the process, it's important to note, like I said, students are going to be able to provide more context as to why they would like to be reconsidered for financial aid. That first step is determining the eligibility by reviewing the different forms that are necessary for the financial aid office to make those considerations. You know, shortly after they take that step of determining their eligibility, they'll want to contact the financial aid office to explain the situation. This is where the resource I'm going to talk about next comes in. It gives them the language to say, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. This is why the amount of, you know, maybe family contribution that's been assessed is incorrect and needs to be either reevaluated or reconsidered. And they'll want to set up an appointment to have that time and space to talk to the financial aid office. And then, just like we talked about with the financial aid application itself, it's important that students know there will be follow-up steps they need to take in order to complete this process. There are so many times where, you know, students, they go through this really traumatic process of having to drum up these things that are hard to talk about. And once they get through it, they think that's it. When in reality, there are a couple more signatures that are needed. And unfortunately, financial aid offices can't go through that process in its entirety unless all of those requirements are met. So we want to make sure to encourage our students to stay connected, stay engaged, make sure they see this all the way through. We are the support systems for them. We are the cheerleaders for them. So we love to encourage them to continue on and to get through the process as best they can. Some additional tips for going through the process with students. They'll want to make sure they continue to contact the financial aid office through each of the steps of the process, from submitting the form to getting the forms received from the school to the follow-up information that they send in. They'll want to make sure to contact the schools because the schools are also going through this process with several other students. And so unfortunately, it is fairly easy for students to kind of fall through the cracks in that regard. So this is another opportunity to kind of support in self-advocacy and self-support and teach them kind of that follow-up process that is necessary as they're making this transition out of high school and into their post-secondary pathway. And then here's that support that I mentioned. It's the link that Christina's put in the chat, but it is a resource called Form Swift, and specifically Swift Student is the branch of Form Swift that was developed at the beginning of the pandemic to help students explain the different circumstances they may be going through that would warrant reconsideration of their financial aid award letters. Once they log on to that website, we can hop over to the next slide. It'll give them an opportunity to create a document based off of a template that gives all of the language that financial aid offices need to start that reconsideration process. And it's actually a pretty straightforward process for the student. Let's hop over to the next slide. They'll be asked to fill out these different blank areas within the template itself, a date of submission, pieces of information about themselves. We can bop over to the next slide. Contact information for themselves and who is involved in this process from a parent perspective. And that will help them give the language to the financial aid office to trigger this process. One of the most difficult things for a student is to even know what to ask. And this resource does a great job of providing that language to students and to families. If you have students and families going through the financial aid process and they're just not sure that this is right for them in terms of the financial aid process, if they're not sure if they're being evaluated properly based on their circumstances, this could actually be a great place to start because it gives templates based on many different situations. And students and families may find that their situation is one of the templates that's available. So highly encourage this as a resource to keep in your tool belt as you're working with your students.
All right. So we're going to discuss some of the roles that you can play as educators in how you support students through the process that Sam was describing. So these are some actions you can take to help your students through this appeals process, whether it's verification or the appeals. Students are often asked to share their stories. In some cases, can be traumatic events that they're going through or maybe are currently going through with their family. If a parent loses a job, if there's been a need for medical care from a family member, something like that, these can be hard situations to talk about for students. So along with that, you also want to be mindful about one of the things that Christina mentioned is imposter syndrome for students. Do they feel like they belong at the college? A lot of times this can feel like a not very welcoming process for students. So your role as an educator can be really to support students as they're going through this. Also want to note it can be a tough position for staff as well, where you are often having to play that middle, that intermediary between the student and the institution, and communicate policies, communicate challenges in the process. It can put you in a challenging position. So just something to be mindful of and think about how you can support students and how you can find advocates in the financial aid office, champions for students in the financial aid office. One big piece where students need support is helping facilitate their communication. And we've talked a lot about kind of what that follow-up process looks like, making sure that students are checking their email or their regular mail, and following up in a timely fashion, that they're understanding what's in those emails, and they have the support to build those advocacy skills themselves. And things can be done, or activities, practicing these conversations beforehand, and getting students mentally prepared to have some of these conversations or understand kind of the broader context of what's going on, can be very helpful for them. So some key takeaways that we want to ensure that you have as you're leaving this section. Appeals are available and they are typically reserved for special cases. They can be time-sensitive processes that require coaching, which is your role, and likely will require follow-through and patience on their behalf and your behalf as well, as you're working with a student who this is their first time potentially going through an appeals process like this. Also, appeals are not a silver bullet. They're not going to address every financial challenge that the student is facing. even if you do get a revision, it may not be a huge amount or enough to significantly change their financial situation, but every little bit helps, right? So managing expectations with the student as you're going through that process. All right, so we have a quick test your knowledge. We have a handful of scenarios up there. And what I'd like you to do is in the chat, go ahead and enter which, oh, we're not launching the poll quite yet, not yet. Enter in the chat which scenarios should consider an appeal. So is it going to be scenario 1, family just found out they will need to move grandpa into an assisted living facility. Family home is being treated for a mold and there's an additional cost with that. Family must pay for a double knee replacement surgery for their family dog. Parent is planning not to pay for students' education, or parent is experiencing a decrease in income. So which of those should consider an appeal? Go ahead and enter that in the chat. All right, looks like most folks are on the same page. 1, 2, and 5 are going to be the ones that you should consider an appeal for. And then somebody put in the chat, if the dog is a service animal, that is a good question. Is that a statement of fact, or can anybody confirm that? Do you know that one, Christina?
I would have to research. I'm like, congratulations, who? Oh, okay, Christy, you are the person who stumped me today. I'm gonna do some research, but I think it has to be, when it comes to medical bills, they're looking at family medical bills. But if it's a service animal, it could be considered support for the other person. So I would have to do some research. It may come down to an institutional decision though, which is what all professional judgments come on.
And that is a great example of, there's these policies that are laid out, and then we have the real life implementation of it, right? Like there's these unique scenarios that come up and we have to support and navigate students through that. So, and then I also saw a question around 4, parent is planning on not paying for a student's education expenses. That is, unfortunately, I've seen situations where just a parent not being involved or not desiring to support a student through that process is not sufficient enough reason for an appeal. And that is a really challenging process, because then you're having to dive into the dynamics of the child-parent relationship, which is always a hard situation. So I wish that were one that we could appeal, but that is typically not the case.
And I just wanted to also chime in. So I'm seeing some of the questions come up. There is no part of the FAFSA that asks about current outstanding medical debt. The CSS profile, if the student has to complete that, it does have questions about other types of debt, but it doesn't, the FAFSA itself doesn't assess medical debt. And that's why you want to use an appeal, is because it's harder to create a more accurate picture of the family's ability to pay if they have outstanding medical costs. And so that's why you're going to use that SWIFT student appeal, because you're going to use the section that says, I think it's the, that I have a debt that's not reflected within, a medical debt reflected within the FAFSA. And for parents who are not willing to pay, unfortunately, it's the same with parents who aren't willing to provide the information for the financial aid application. It greatly impacts the student in a negative way. It is, if the parent doesn't provide financial support, I understand, I see a lot of parents that's the case. They don't have the ability to provide financial support. This is not I am not trying to shame anybody. Like, finances are very tight. The world has changed a lot in the last 4 years, 3 years actually now. And not everyone has the ability to be able to send their child to college. I think that sometimes it's not about like them not wanting to pay, but not having the ability to pay. When they don't fill out the application, like their component of the application, that means the student may be lucky if they get loans. And so if the parents aren't willing to pay, unfortunately, that still doesn't change their EFC. Now, if they're not able to pay, and there might be some of these reasons like medical bills, things like that, where an appeal could come in, then we want to make sure maybe they lost income through a job. They want to apply for an appeal. When parents don't fill out taxes, if they're required to fill out taxes, federal aid is good. There are going to be some restrictions to federal aid. And so parents who do not fill out their taxes may also impact a student's ability to get aid. And I know that can be a challenge, especially if anyone has done their 2022 taxes in the recent times. There are a lot of people that are in an owing status this year. So I do see this as something that potentially can impact next year's applications as well, because of the changes to tax structure and different credits that are no longer available. But if they're required to fill out taxes and they don't, that also can be a challenge. Parents who live outside the United States are still required to provide information unless the student's in a legal guardianship. So what ends up happening is the parents are required to provide the financial income information. They just basically use a currency tool to transition the currency that they are using into the United States dollar. And that's what they'll put on the form. But they are still required to complete and sign a FAFSA. Now, with the FSCID component coming up, it might be a little bit easier than us trying to get signatures from other countries, just as a heads up. I know that that's been real challenging of how do I get a physical signature for those who do not have an FSCID. I think that might be a little more helpful than us having to like send signature pages from other countries. That's been really hard, or finding printing options in other countries and things like that. That was just my ones that I wanted to chime in on, Christian. I just
Great.
And then I'm going to research that service animal. Thank you. I'm just as curious as you. So I'm going to find that out and I'll get that information out there. I didn't even think about that. We all know, those of us who have dogs, we're like, come on, that double knee replacement. We know that's expensive. Why can't it be picked? It's so hard.
Been there, done that. Yeah, that's not a cheap situation. So thank you for the input, Christina. Again, there's nuance to a lot of these situations. So again, this is why finding a friend in the financial aid office to help you navigate some of these things is often a great approach. All right, so quick discussion questions. Go ahead and enter in the chat. Do you have any award letter programming planned for this year? This would be the season to be thinking about that. And what resources either can you or have you made available to support students with selecting a financial aid package? So if you have any great promising practices that you want to share with folks here, we welcome that input there. I'll give a moment for folks to fill that out. Great. It sounds like there are some who have programming planned. If folks have examples of resources they've shared, if you don't have resources, you have some now with the Swift Student, the Swift Student website. Great. Any other examples of programming folks are thinking about or are currently planning? Great. Yeah, just letting students know about the resources that you that you have available. And if that is just having somebody to come talk to them and sort through what their award letter actually means and how to make sense of it. And often they're comparing multiple award letters, and that's a big component of how they're making their decision. This can also involve, opportunities for family engagement as well, thinking about how do we support our student, what are the financial impacts, and how do you begin families early in that conversation piece. So you can think about that of how do you bring those folks in. Another Gear Up resource. Yeah, great. All right, we'll keep entering those in the chat and share those with the folks who we have present today. We would love to see that as things come up. All right, I'm going to pass it back to you, Christina, for some follow-up items.
Yes. Okay. So outside scholarships. So let's talk a little bit about how that impacts it. So number one, just getting outside scholarships. They're going to like more and more commonly require an EFC. They're trying to ensure in scholarship awarding that that families have unmet need, or they can see that like maybe they don't have an zero EFC and that there's going to be more unmet need, but they're usually typically trying to use the EFC as a way to help assess in the scholarship application process. When a student gets a scholarship, we know how exciting it is. We know whether it's a small scholarship or a large scholarship, that that's another opportunity to reduce the debt of the student who is going to college, but they have to inform the financial aid office. Some of these scholarships are just for tuition. It depends on how the scholarship's written and how that's going to fit into the award letter. And so they want to reach out to the financial aid office of the college that they're going to go to. And sometimes, I mean, like I've had students where they have like a system at the college where they say submit your outside scholarships here, and it's a portal, things like that, but they're going to follow the process of their college. Some scholarships will pay directly to the school, and so sometimes they need either they need a copy of registration so that there's a bill. We know that the students won't have classes registered yet, and so there's not going to be a bill that they can provide for the scholarship committee, but they can connect them with the bursar's office so that they can go ahead and do a direct payment once classes have been registered. But there might be an additional form that the student has to approve that a third-party payer is paying on tuition. So they just want to follow that process. Next slide, please. Okay, so also it can impact the student's grant aid. So if a scholarship comes in and pays, let's say, tuition, but they already have full tuition covered by a grant, they can't be double paid for tuition. And that's why I encourage, when you're working with scholarship committees, if they can adjust the language in their scholarships to maybe cover not tuition, but like housing, other things that are also the debt of education, but not specifically the tuition rate. So it can impact, and there could be displacement. They want to talk to the school to see if they can adjust their cost of attendance, see if they can defer that scholarship if it's going to displace grant aid, or see if it can cover other things. They want to try to reduce the loan first. And I've had some scholarship committees who've gone, oh, we didn't know. We just assumed tuition is what needs to be covered. But actually, this student needs other fees covered, or this student needs housing covered. Or I've had some scholarships who were like, okay, we'll just disperse cash to the student after everything's paid for. Now, just as a heads up, if the student gets a scholarship above the cost of attendance, so I had a student who got a $20,000 scholarship. It was amazing, but it ended up being $10,000 over all of their paid cost of attendance. That became income for the student. And for their following year, it ended up pushing them out of eligibility for some types of gift aid. So they just want to be mindful if they're getting large cash-based scholarships that they are not, I've only seen it once in 20 years, but if it happens, we just want them to be mindful of the impact it could have as being considered income for the following year. Next slide. Okay, after the award letter, it's still not over. There's still some steps. And so things to be aware of. Aid distribution. Oh my goodness. The money's going to go to the college first to pay tuition, fees, and any other direct costs. It's going to go automatically to the school. The refund is anything that's those indirect costs, textbooks, housing, transportation. We want to make sure that the refund that they gets to them in a timely fashion. So Sometimes it can be direct deposit the student will set up, but sometimes it's a prepaid debit card. But if they don't set that system up in a timely fashion, then they could have a delay on their refund, which impacts them getting their books on time. So we just want to make sure that when they get their award and it says you have these steps you have to follow, like sometimes it's Bank Mobile that they use or other things, they want to make sure that they're setting up that process early on so they can get their card quicker, so they can get their direct deposit quick as possible. I had one student who didn't know they were supposed to set up anything for their prepaid debit card, and they didn't get their money until I think 27 days into the quarter. And teachers are amazing. This teacher, so sweet. She was like, I just found these books. She was like, what books do you need? And then she just found them. The teacher went out and bought the books for the student. That normally doesn't happen, but we want to make sure students have access to all the resources they need if their award is delayed and they need copies of their textbook. One option is a lot of the professors get extra copies of their textbook from the book publishers because they're like, we want you to buy more of these. And those professors sometimes will put copies as use in the library only at the library at the school. They can go to the library and use those within the library. They can't check them out, but they can use them there. And so it just means they're studying in the library for a little bit of time. Just as a heads up, because I know that it can be really challenging. We know those textbooks aren't cheap, and we want to make sure that they have access to everything they need to be successful. Also, they can talk to the professor and say, my award is delayed. But we would much rather have them set this stuff up first so that they have access to everything. And then emergency aid. And I realized, Christian, I went over your slide. I apologize. I got real excited about what happens after that award and those students getting their cash. If you want to
It's
talk
all
about
good.
emergency aid.
Sure. I can hop in for this one, but no worries. Just emergency aid. This is something for folks to keep in mind. Most colleges will have a process for awarding emergency aid, and this is a one-time issuance of funds to help students through special circumstances. And this may be the situation where the dog had double knee surgery. It's up to the college around what these circumstances are. And so there may be a little more flexibility there. And usually if it's, I don't have the funds to attend next quarter because I need to dedicate, funds to X situation, whatever it may be. So as those situations pop up, remember to kind of keep this situation in your back pocket, learn and understand what that emergency aid process looks like for your campus and who the contact people are for that. Will be really helpful for retention because life happens, right? So we want to be able to help students through those situations. Typically the amounts are slightly smaller amounts. Like if I recall correctly, the institution I worked at awarded, it would be around $500. And again, this was a one-time award. Although that may fluctuate depending on programs that your school is offering. It may fluctuate depending on grants that may have been awarded, or if a donor provided additional money to address emergency situations. So it's typically, I'd say, in the $500 range, but that probably varies by college and varies depending on what's going on at that institution. All right, so we have our second round of polling. So on a scale of 1 to 5, now that we've gone through this process, we've gotten to learn more about the verification, award, and appeals process. How comfortable are you with financial aid? All right, so go ahead, fill out that poll. All right, looks like we're getting everybody's answer. All right, so you can see the results there. We definitely shifted up more from the 2s and 3s to a lot of folks in the 4s. So again, like hopefully this is a good foundation for you all. But as we learned just going through this, there are unique circumstances. There will constantly be things that will throw you for a loop. We are here as a resources. You can utilize the resources we are about to provide in the next section. And also, like I've mentioned, make sure to find that student champion in the financial aid office. Find your buddy there who can help you through some of these unique situations as they come up. So I will keep us moving. And Dinda, I will pass it off to you, and you can share some resources for the group.
Yeah, so here are some resources to help support your students. PSCCN Financial Aid Toolkit equips educators, youth program workers, or anybody assisting students with navigating the financial aid process. The toolkit provides guidance on frequently asked questions about financial aid, common scenarios, implementation guides, financial aid completion strategies. It also has student and family resources, including presentation, activities, outreach, language for families. It also has promotional materials, including posters, event flyers, stickers, desktop. Now, because we're working remotely, I have received some requests, and it takes me a little bit to go back to the office to send these out, but we have a little bit, not as much as we used to before, but they are there. But you can also get these on our website at PSCCN.org. And then we also have the college knowledge, which is currently being updated. I'm not exactly sure when this will be finalized, but the college knowledge is a handout that covers the most requested college readiness topics, and it is available in English, Spanish, Somali, Russian, and Vietnamese. And so right now you can order copies. I'll share the link in the chat, but you can only order copies in Spanish and English. Yeah, so that's it for our resources. I'll pass it on to Yasleen.
And both of us are going to jump in because if you saw us last year, saw me and Sam last year, Sam is a small part, but mighty part of the 12th year campaign. But this year we grew by 1. So we basically doubled the staff of the 12th year campaign. So Yasleen is joining and she'll talk more about how she supports the East Side. But the 12th year campaign, our small and mighty team that serves the whole state, is a program where schools can sign up, as well as CBOs and other organizations can sign up to receive resources and support. What I love about the 12th year campaign is we really are tailoring our stuff to support high school students. So high school counselors, especially with your financial aid advising day activities in the fall, we have resources. What we do is we provide resources for those who are not charging students and families for support. So that's one of our limitations with the 12th year campaign, is we're here to support anybody who's not charging for these activities. But if you are charging students, families, or organizations, we unfortunately can't send you any of our materials. But if you are not charging, feel free to order materials. I do want to say, when it comes to ordering materials, I know because we have materials that are free, of course, order what you need, number one. But remember, everything's changing next year, which includes all the materials and resources. So when you're ordering, don't order for next year right now. Just order for this current, what you need for this current school year, because then Yasleen and I are going to be like, hey, see these documents? Recycle them, because we're going to have new ones available in the fall for you that really strictly adhere to the new rules of the financial aid application for 24-25. And so I'm going to pass it off to Yasleen. I'm so excited to have our program grow, and she's going to talk about the 12th year campaign.
Yes, as Christina mentioned, I am located on the east side of the state, so I am in Tri-Cities, and hopefully in a future, once I'm at least half as knowledgeable as Christina is, I'll be on my own here on the east side. So yeah, she was talking about the free materials and trainings we have. There's 3 different modules or models. You can either serve as a 12th year campaign site and partner with us for college applications, FAFSA, WASFA events, or just strictly just financial aid events, or you can do your own events like she mentioned and help have our materials and resources to help you. Again, at the end of the year, everything is going to go away and it's going to be brand new. So just be careful when you're ordering things, or next year too, if you haven't already ordered new material, make sure you're not using old material and confusing students and confusing yourself and everyone else. There's also the FAFSA completion portal, and you can just see basic student level information about what their FAFSA completion status is. There we go. Okay, and then we have the free postcards that you can order as well, and workbooks. The postcards are really cool. They have on the other side what you need to bring to your FAFSA completion events or financial aid in general, and they come in various languages. Next slide, please. All right. Christina has created really cool Padlets that are really easy to use. This is the practitioner Padlet. So this has a whole bunch of links that will help you support students. And yeah, it could be, I think they're dropping the links in the chat so you can access those there. And then this is the student Padlet, similar to the practitioner one, but this is more like student focused. There's financial aid, there's scholarships, next steps on like award letters, and just like basic college information that students can access. Next slide. And this is, WASAC has a student loan advocate office. So we highly encourage those who either have questions like you had current borrowers or future borrowers or past, and you still have questions about loans. They're there to help, and there's modules that students can watch and get a better understanding of what a loan is, how a loan works, what loans to take, what loans not to take, all that kind of stuff. So that's a really cool resource when students are asking about loans. Next. And I'll pass it to someone.
All right, well, that's all we have for today. But thank you all for being here, for spending a good chunk of time with us on a Wednesday morning. We know this was a lot of information, but we hope it was beneficial for you. Thank you to our partners at WASAC. We couldn't do this without you, and we appreciate your expertise and knowledge. We are entering an evaluation link. Are we doing that in the email, or do we have that ready to go in the chat? Great. So Dinda's entered that in the chat. Please take a few moments to fill that out for us. That helps us track attendance and helps us get attain funding to continue to do these trainings. So appreciate your time for that. And then we can hang out for a few minutes if anybody has any follow-up questions. But we have our contact information here. Feel free to reach out to any one of us if you do have any specific questions for us. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate you being here. And thank you most of all for supporting students through the financial aid process.
And if I didn't get to your questions in the chat, stick around. I'm happy to answer them. Still don't have information about that service dog component, but it's going to take a little more digging for me.
Yes, and we will share
Yes.
the slides after the fact.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. I know it's a lot of work supporting students as they take their next steps, but I'm so grateful that we get to do all this work together. If there's anything we can do to better support your work, just let us know. And because not everyone asks questions while it's being recorded, should we stop the recording? And that way, just in case people, it might make people more comfortable